Mark Carney torched the G7 communique and sent a message echoing across the globe. This isn't diplomacy, it's defiance. Trump landed swinging, demanding 5% defense budgets from every nation, pushing new tariffs and offhandedly floating the idea of annexing Canada. Macron rerouted to Greenland in an open act of provocation. Japan filed a WTO complaint, Mexico came lawyered up, and behind every closed door the whisper was the same. The United States wasn't just out of control, it was actively destabilizing the global economy. This was supposed to be the G7. Instead, Alberta became a pressure cooker of fractured alliances and political maneuvering. Carney's moves stunned leaders, canceling the communique before talks even began, a breach of protocol unseen since 1975. Reuters reported that the White House and EU were blindsided. There would be no final agreement, no shared vision, no headline victory to spin. Carney's team told Bloomberg it was intentional, a refusal to whitewash U.S. trade coercion, a direct answer to Trump's sudden sweeping 10% universal tariff, now slamming over $1.1 trillion in allied exports. Where there's usually unity on climate security markets, there was now a cold vacant chair summary. Moran's aides called it without precedent. A German diplomat was more blunt. This is tactical silence. No accord meant no legitimacy, no common ground, and crucially for Trump, no paper to wave on the campaign trail. But Carney's maneuver raised a bigger question. Had he just redefined resistance inside the G7? Trump had already set fire to diplomatic norms. On the campaign trail in March 2025, he claimed Canada should have been American from the beginning. The backlash in Ottawa was immediate. Former defense chiefs condemning it as imperial fantasy, but the numbers told another story. The U.S. ran a $38.6 billion trade deficit with Canada last year. Trump's answer? Tariffs on dairy, 22%, aluminum 10%, lumber 14%. Canadian factories bled $4.2 billion in Q1 alone, according to Bloomberg. And while the cameras rolled in Alberta, Carney's negotiators were in D.C., scrambling to shield Canada's most strategic exports, critical minerals, clean tech from new economic sovereignty clauses designed to choke off access. Former WTO negotiator Peter Clark didn't mince words. This isn't a trade spat, it's a sovereignty test dressed up in tariff codes, which beg the question, if Trump sees Canada as an extension of U.S. markets, what comes next? Then came Macron. He didn't just arrive in Alberta, he staged a countermove. Hours earlier, he landed unannounced in Greenland, standing shoulder to shoulder with Danish PM Mette Frederiksen and declaring, "Greenland is not for sale." The timing wasn't coincidence. It was a pointed rebuke of Trump's revived 2025 proposal to buy the Arctic territory. First floated on Fox News, then amplified across conservative media. With U.S. drilling permits expanding and NORAD pressure intensifying, Macron beat Trump to the punch, turning a would-be real estate grab into a sovereignty showdown. European diplomats told Reuters the move was preemptive. Macron didn't just counter the narrative, he seized it. His media team flooded the wires with photos, press hits, handshakes. The story wrote itself, the French president standing for democratic orders, while the American president threatened them. By the time Trump arrived in Canmore, the battlefield wasn't diplomatic, it was psychological. Macron had already framed the summit. Trump was reacting. And if Macron played offense, others played defense. Germany's Chancellor Merz flew in under pressure from Berlin's $17.5 billion export plunge to the U.S., driven mostly by Trump's auto tariffs. Japan's Shigeru Ishiba was cornered. Tokyo's $74.1 billion trade surplus had triggered new threats from Washington to reopen Section 232 steel probes. The UK's Keir Starmer arrived bruised from a narrow election win, clutching a fragile 12-month digital trade exemption from Trump that notably excluded financial services. Mexico's Claudia Sheinbaum faced chaos of her own as DHS floated doubling border tariffs unless Mexico adopted a U.S.-style asylum regime. Even the guest nations weren't spared. India's Narendra Modi stood under an RCMP cloud. Canadian police reviewing his government's alleged links to political violence against Sikh activists in Toronto. Every leader was walking into crisis. None came to build consensus, they came to survive. And still, no one was in control. The summit had no spine, no shared voice. Carney's refusal to issue a joint statement wasn't just protocol breaking, it robbed Trump of the final act. No communicate, no closure, just press conferences filled with accusations, defensive posturing, and thinly veiled threats. The World Bank is already modeling the long tail of economic damage. Allies are questioning whether the G7 can still function as a meaningful bloc. And across capitals, the same quiet fear is growing. If this was a summit meant to manage global disorder, what happens when it becomes the source of it? The June 2025 Global Economic Prospects report shaved 0.7% off global GDP forecasts, citing one main culprit: trade chaos from the U.S. Mounting tariffs, shifting exemptions, and retaliatory blowback are sowing uncertainty. Canada alone has taken a $4.2 billion hit this year, mainly in softwood, beef, and battery-grade nickel, according to Statistics Canada. At the G7 summit in Kananaskis, that damage wasn't just discussed, it was strategically silenced. Prime Minister Carney released only a chair's summary, denying President Trump a chance to spin Canadian diplomacy into a domestic win. On NATO, when Trump demanded allies spend 5% of GDP on defense, Carney didn't blink. Canada will not use its federal budget as a metric of military compliance, he said flatly. It wasn't just a snub, it was a strategy. As Max Bergman of SACE put it, Carney didn't just mute the mic, he controlled the lighting, the framing, and the final shot. The Canadian Rockies weren't just a scenic backdrop, they were a tactical fortress. Roads were sealed, protesters pushed 50 miles out, and the RCMP enforced a full lockdown, the first since 2002. But this wasn't about safety, it was about control. Leaders arrived to find no final document, no press conference, no joint statement, just absence. And in that vacuum, silence became the story. Every G7 nation but the UK now faces US tariffs. EU officials told readers the summit was designed to sidestep confrontation but is doing the opposite. Still, Carney's team isn't scrambling. One senior official summed it up: "You don't need to chase headlines when you've built the stage. This silence, it's not a void, it's a message. Beneath the optics, deeper tremors are shaking the system. US trade policy isn't just disruptive, it's become the volatility itself." Bergman again. The G7's supposed to be the engine of coordination. Now the US is the destabilizer. Since the start of Trump's second term, Washington has slapped tariffs on $1.3 trillion in goods and shredded 6 trade deals within 90 days of renegotiation. The result? Global capital inflows dropped 12.4% in Q1, the sharpest quarterly fall since early CO, citing US unpredictability as a top risk. At Canonis, Trump isn't defending the numbers, he's dodging them. His team is fixated on NATO budgets and sovereign leverage while economists fill the vacuum. And when data speaks louder than podiums, who's really driving the G7 narrative around the table? Old allies came armed with new shields. France, Germany, and Italy have activated EU-wide mechanisms for automatic retaliation if US tariffs climb. As soon as Trump floated a 17% duty on European machinery, the bloc's early warning system kicked in. Japan is calling for WTO mediation over aluminum classifications. Mexico arrived with legal briefs prepared for new border levies, and India's presence, already strained by Canadian allegations of foreign interference, added even more tension in the back channels. A former Canadian G7 negotiator said it plainly: it's not a summit anymore, it's parallel crisis management, each nation playing defense, sometimes from each other. How long before this tips from diplomacy to pure damage control? What began in 1975 as an elite club for economic stability now looks more like a mirror reflecting geopolitical drift. The G7 was meant to safeguard rules, but with Trump pushing annexations, trashing climate commitments, ignoring security frameworks, and driving tariffs through the heart of global trade, the rules themselves are fraying. Carney's refusal to sign a joint communique is more than a political signal. It's a structural one. This is the second time in 7 years a Canadian PM has refused to rubber stamp unity under Trump, but this time it isn't protest, it's pivot. According to AFP, several diplomats now call the G7 a legacy construct, a symbol for the cameras, not a core of policy. If the host won't endorse it, the guest shrugs it off and the rest quietly hedge bets. What's left to defend? Maybe the G7 isn't breaking. Maybe it already broke and just kept meeting out of habit. So where does that leave us? With a summit built on consensus now hollowed out by contradiction, a chair who left the meeting open-ended, a president who may have dismantled more than just the agenda. But don't mistake this for the finale. It's the warning shot. Because if silent defiance of the G7 reshaped diplomatic norms, just wait for NATO. That's where budgets become battlegrounds and silence won't be an option. If Trump brings his 5% defense demand to that table, the real fireworks haven't even started. The alliances we've known for decades, they're already bending. The next summit might break them, so don't blink.